UX Podcast Episode 305.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to UX Podcast, coming to you from Stockholm, Sweden. We are your hosts, Per Axbom
and James Roy Lawson,
balancing business, technology, people, and society with listeners all over the world, from Georgia to Argentina.
And we have a link show today.
Yes.
And a link show, that is when Per and I, we have checked the entire internet, we've read everything that's been published, and we have pulled out 2 articles that we think are worth sharing with you and discussing.
And the 2 articles are, the first one, Designing for People with Dyscalculia and Low Numeracy. And you'll hear me struggle with the word dyscalculia today, but dyscalculia, I'm not sure how to pronounce it.
The article itself is saying Dyscalculia. Yeah, I know, but I know that's not how we pronounce it before.
It doesn't feel right for me.
We just have to trust them, Per. And that article's by Laura Parker, Jane McFadden, and Rachel Malik. And the second one we've got for you is how ChatGPT is blowing Google out of the water, a UX breakdown. And that one is by Megan Eng.
And it's very topical. It's fun to get something that is so acutely something that's on everybody's lips these days, and actually having a UX perspective on it. So a couple of years ago, I actually don't know how many years ago.
4. I don't know. I'm guessing 4. Per.
You're aware. I attended an accessibility event here in Stockholm, and on stage was a person who worked with people with dyscalculia, and it was sort of mind-blowing to me because this was something I hadn't heard about before, and it addressed something that I was not aware of, despite having worked for a long time with online accessibility. And just a few days ago, you, James, came across this article that with a poster describing things you can do to help people with dyscalculia.
Yeah. The reason why I think it's probably nearly 5 years ago you went to that talk is because I noticed in our planning board that we'd added dyscalculia as a potential topic show back in March 2018. And we have actually mentioned it. For those of you that are dedicated listeners and have listened to every single episode, we've talked about it briefly back in episode 196, which was accessibility for designers, and then also again in episode 253, the state of accessibility with Derek Featherstone. But we've only mentioned it briefly, and I remember when you first told me about that talk, and I hadn't heard of it back then, and didn't realize it was a thing.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is part of a poster series that people who work with accessibility probably are aware of, that has come out of gov.uk over the years. And so this is like a complement to that poster series. And it's just lovely. And I think we should probably get on with describing what even is dyscalculia.
First, though, we want to say this blog post is on a UK government blog, Designing Government blog. Which they have the motto for the blog. We believe working in the open makes things better. This blog is for people designing all aspects of public services, from local to central government, to share their projects, ideas and concepts, or just to think out loud. And the 3 individuals who are behind this post are Jane McFadden, Rachel Malik and Laura Parker. All 3 are on Twitter, but one of them, Laura, is also on Mastodon.
And that's how you found the article.
It is, actually, how I found it.
So dyscalculia is a learning disorder that affects a person's ability to do math. I guess that's the simple explanation, but that makes it hard for someone to read, understand, and work with numbers. So you're working with numbers probably more than you think all day long. You're handling money when you're counting change. You're actually telling and managing time, estimating how long things will take when you're doing stuff. And percentages, which I know a lot of people struggle with, and just remembering number facts about anything. And I guess years even. I mean, years are numbers. So just understanding when something happened in history is, of course, a struggle as well.
Public transport, moving around. There's numbers absolutely everywhere.
Just giving directions to someone, you say, so you walk 500 meters in that direction, and people may not even understand what that means. So how does that affect life? Yes, people miss trains. They withdraw the wrong amount of money from cash machines. They get locked out of their accounts because, of course, passwords are a huge problem as well. And perhaps they sign contracts they don't understand.
Yeah, that was actually one of the parts of the article which really does stand out for me, was talking about financial services and falling into debt. And basically, how can people understand the consequences of what they're getting into if they don't understand their options?
Exactly. And you don't even perhaps understand how much debt you are in.
Yeah.
So this affects it's actually influenced by different processing centers in the brain. And I was doing research and I found this article that also explained that it is affected by visual processing. It's affected by your short-term memory. It's affected by your understanding of language. It's affected by long-term memory, your understanding of quantities and amounts, and even your ability to calculate. So there are different processing centers in your brain, and each of these can be affected a little, nothing, or a lot. So even if someone has dyscalculia, it may not present itself in the same way as another person who has dyscalculia. And that's, I think, is something important to remember with all different types of accessibility issues, is that it's very hard to generalize.
I think on top of this, though, what aspect I like about the article is that it has an inclusive design feel to it, in that it makes a point of pointing out that it's not just people with dyscalculia that struggle with numbers, that low numeracy can also be a factor in. So all those different aspects that you listed then, all of them, many of them can also result from low numeracy.
Exactly.
You don't have to have a diagnosed or undiagnosed condition to struggle with some of these number-related things.
And there are reasons you could develop it later in life as well, because that would be like acquired dyscalculia, where someone perhaps develops dementia or has some sort of brain damage. So it doesn't mean that it necessarily is something that you're also born with. So that means it affects a lot of people.
The article itself quotes a figure of 1 in 20 in the UK, and makes a comparison with dyslexia. Dyslexia in the UK, according to the article, says between 1 in 10 and 1 in 20. But that itself is interesting because they say a lot of people aren't diagnosed as having dyscalculia.
Exactly.
So the 1 in 20 is just possibly the I don't know if that's an estimate or kind of officially diagnosed. So you probably can say it's up there with dyslexia as in how frequent it appears.
Definitely. In the other research I did, I found it affects between 3% and 7% according to experts worldwide. So that is actually a huge number of people, and that we probably aren't taking into account the way that we should be. And that's why this poster is so very useful. And I want to get into talking a bit about the way the poster is designed. Is that it has 2 columns with the title Designing for Users with Dyscalculia or Low Numeracy. And the left column says do and lists items that you should be doing. And the right column lists do not, items you should not be doing.
Pat, I liked and I noticed that it says do and do not.
Yeah.
It doesn't say don't.
Oh, yeah.
I think they've deliberately written it out as do not there. It made me think of the no step on aeroplane wings and stuff. They kind of made the language clearer.
Yeah, exactly. So let's get into some of the examples in the do column. So what you should be doing: round numbers to the nearest whole number. And immediately I think of pricing pages, because when you are shopping online, of course, you see numbers all the time.
Oh, the .99 has been a classic of many decades to make you think things are cheaper. 9.99.
And that this one actually, in this case, it actually has the counterpart on the right-hand side under do not. It says do not use decimals unless it's money. So it seems to actually be sort of, it's accepted more when it comes to money that you actually can use decimals.
Well, I think the article doesn't go into that, but one of the things there, of course, is what kind of price span you're looking at. I mean, if you're looking at prices of things that cost, tens of pounds, we use it's a British article, so was it tens of pounds or hundreds of pounds? You probably don't need to worry about pence. So, like the decimal point, you don't need to say £523 and 43p.
Yeah, you
can probably round that there safely without causing monetary problems. But if you're a £1 shop and you're selling everything that's around about £1, then you can't round it to. Well, maybe you need to be more differential with saying 0.5. But
and that makes the second point under the do column, or in the do column, very important, that when you're using numbers, leave space around the numbers. That makes it easier to process.
So does this mean like white space around the whole thing? So you've got to, leave it in a little island of space, or?
That's my interpretation, yes. But if you're writing it as part of a sentence, that's something else, because then you're using the sentence to actually provide context and allow people to understand it more easily.
And that was another one of the points on the do side.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Use sentences to add context about numbers.
So the two of those things go together, or are kind of variations on how to make the numbers more approachable.
Yeah,
that's the
exactly.
Right word to use.
Yeah, less difficult to deal with, I guess. Let people include spaces when entering numbers. This is an interesting one, because that pertains to phone numbers, to credit card numbers. I think that's something that people have debated over the years. Sorry?
Postcodes as well.
Yeah.
Or zip codes, anywhere you are. Yeah, I mean, this type of affordance is something that we've mentioned many times, and it's in usability testing as well, it comes up as a frustration that when you do, you enter things like a telephone number with spaces in, and you get red text and like error messages thrown at you because you've entered it with spaces. It's like, it doesn't make any difference. You can process it afterwards. So here is a wonderful encouragement to build a bit of affordance into some of this data entry, especially with numbers, and ask yourself whether you really do need to force people to format things a particular way.
Exactly. And when you say force, I'm actually looking at the last point in the do not column. Do not force people to enter a number or do a sum to verify themselves. Because I think that some people are actually are trying to make a point when you do like a CAPTCHA, that you shouldn't use all these complicated images. You should just do a simple math problem like 2 + 3. The thing to remember is that is not a simple math problem for everyone, because it requires a processing of things, a language processing of the plus sign and the equal sign that isn't easy for everyone.
Yeah, and even though it might be mentally something that they can do, being able to interpret it from the page and in the stress of logging in, perform that task. Exactly. It's not as simple as it may appear when you're sat there in a sprint planning session and deciding to implement it. There was also another one of the do's was fill in the information you already have.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is actually an interesting one. What kind of information are we talking about there?
Ooh, that's interesting. I'm assuming it is because you are already logged in and you perhaps want people to enter phone numbers, account numbers, stuff like that they perhaps have entered previously in another session and you want to use it again.
Or it could also mean that when you're doing a form, that you actually mark the forms up in the correct way so that it utilizes the browser's saved information that you've entered previously.
Yes, good point. And that's
like
part of
address line 1,
yeah.
address line, postcode, and so on.
That's part of WCAG, and you actually should do that.
Yes.
To actually comply with the WCAG guidelines.
And it's very useful to make your forms more, easier to complete generally. So conversion-wise, if you're working with that kind of thing, then you will be wanting to do this.
Exactly. And that's a good point. Always remember that people may have third-party tools that contain the data because they don't want to store it with you. But if you do mark up your fields correctly, then that tool will be able to fill in the content for people.
I think the final one of the do's was the user research.
That's always the good one.
Yeah, with people who actually struggle with numbers.
Yeah.
Always do the user research. Which, again, we were talking about this morning, Per, weren't we, about how there's still certain things that get crossed off the list a little bit too often in the rush to push things out there. And sadly, I still find that user research is one of those things.
It's very true. But also for people who do user research, this is like another thing to think about as you're recruiting participants, and that I don't think a lot of people have been thinking about necessarily. The way that you and I were surprised about how common this is and how much of a struggle it can be because so few people are thinking about it.
So there's a couple more of the do nots, I think, that we maybe should have a little look at too. Overwhelm people with too much content.
Yeah, that one feels like, isn't that always the case? But again, it's such a good reminder that if you don't overwhelm them, then the areas of the brain that they're using for processing this type of data, that will go much easier. But it's always applicable.
And here is I guess removing unnecessary numbers. If you've put too many, maybe these variants or these kind of different numbers appearing there. A bill, I think a kind of a utility bill or something is one of the examples they use there. That you can round things or remove certain presentation of numbers on the bill, so it doesn't feel overwhelming when you look at it.
Exactly.
I think we've all probably felt that when, especially with bills, that you look at something and I remember telephone bills back in the day when they used to list the numbers you'd rung. In fact, they still do some of the ones now. Depending on your contract, you'll show, you sent SMSs or text messages to these numbers. And looking at that page is actually quite hard work because it's just lots and lots of numbers.
Exactly. And what I'm realizing again, as we always say, that all of the things that you are expected to do or not do that is outlined here, that would help me as well. I don't necessarily have Dyscalculia, but it will help me because it will make the information processing easier. So it helps everyone.
Yet again, when we talked about accessibility and inclusive design, it's rare you make things worse for an individual by applying some of these things. Granted, some things might not convert as well, because you're not tricking people in the same way, or you're kind of not pushing them in the same way.
Some things, I love how you express that.
That's perhaps a different episode.
Obviously, the link to this will be in the show notes, and definitely do check it out, print it out, put it up on your wall, and just learn things. I love being curious and learning things like this. Things like this, learning them makes me realize there is so much still left for me to discover about how I can improve the web.
Yeah, no, this is, I think, is a wonderful thing to share, and a wonderful thing because this is one of those gaps in knowledge. I think a lot of designers probably aren't on top of this. Just like me and you weren't really as on top of this until a few years ago when we started to realise it existed. And the article itself basically backs that up too. It says that this area is challenging because, unlike plain language, there's little guidance on presenting numbers and data. It is a hole out there. It's a gap in our education understanding around this thing. So read this, take it in, and share it. So our second article for today is how ChatGPT is blowing Google out of the water, a UX breakdown. And this is an article by Megan Eng. That was published on
Medium in the UX Collective, yeah.
UX Collective. Thank you, Per. Vanished there for a second. This last month or so, there's been an awful lot of chatter and talk about Chat GPT. The new version came out in November, and
not only in tech circles. I mean,
no.
Everyone's been talking about it. I've seen it in general newspapers as well.
Yeah, a lot of coverage, hype, discussion, and what it's going to take over everyone's jobs to, it's the end of mankind. I mean, there's also been a lot of various debates and discussions that some are more accurate than others. But what I liked about this, or what attracted me to this article and this particular topic, was that it had a little bit of a different angle to it, it picked up on something I myself had noticed and felt when I was playing with Chat GPT. It did feel better than a search engine in many ways.
Yeah. So that's a cue for me to just briefly describe what it even is.
Yes.
Everyone will not know what ChatGPT is because you may not have tried it actually, even though it reached 1 million users in only 5 days after its launch. So ChatGPT, it's an artificial intelligence tool, but it has a conversational interface. You type text and sentences or questions or suggestions to this tool, and you ask these questions in natural language, and the system then just responds within seconds with something that is a paragraph, 2 paragraphs, or like even an essay of content, depending on what query you had. And that's what sort of is, and it's the response is so well written and well formulated, and seems like it understood your question perfectly. And that is what is making waves, I guess, with so many people, is that they're not understanding, how does this even work? And the way it works, of course, is that this tool has harvested content from the web and from databases for many, many years. It's a tool that's been worked on since 2015, and it's getting better and better every year, of course. And it's just taking content that already exists and learning how to present that to a human being as a response in a way that makes sense.
And blend it, of course. I mean, that's the kind of key aspect of this. It's sucked in content across many languages, many domains, and spotted patterns in it, and spots patterns of whatever in our questions, and then pulls out, I guess, new answers, or pulls out answers based on that vast quantity of information it has at its disposal.
And what many people may not be aware of is, if you ask the same question several times, you will actually get a differently worded response each time, because it is actually made up on the fly.
Well, I think you've got to remember that, Per. It's updating itself all the time.
Exactly.
So there's a feedback loop there. So every time you ask the question, I mean, there'll be maybe other people asking similar questions. So things will constantly be changing as people are constantly using the tool.
Yep. So you're teaching the tool as you're using it. That's also important to remember.
Yep. What Megan starts off by saying in the article is just that people are expressing out there in forums and social media and so on that they do prefer ChatGPT to Google search, and she uses Google search specifically in the article, and she goes on to list three ways, in 3 explanations, I guess, of why that might be the case, with a UX hat on, I guess. And the first one she lists there is that it's a frictionless experience. I think you get a tailored, written, formatted answer to your query. That differs to the search result you usually get on Google. So Google, by and large, is presenting little clips, excerpts from web pages to you. And you do have to do a bit of information foraging on that result page to find, to evaluate and to find what is the thing that matches your question. They're giving you a menu of things that might be an answer to your query. Sometimes Google nowadays do actually put fact boxes and so on. They do actually, if you put in, I'll go back to numbers. If you put in 10 times 10 in Google, it will tell you the answer at the top. So there are certain things where it's providing direct answers now.
But most of it is like pogo sticking, like you open and go back, you open and go back to make sure that you've read and compared different sources.
Yeah. I think another thing to remember, and Megan actually points this out, that it's a little bit of an unfair comparison, this, in some ways, because we're comparing Google, which is a product that sells lots of advertising, to one which is currently, I guess, a pure tool. I mean, this is just doing natural language processing and giving you answers. It's not forcing lots of adverts onto you and other things. So Megan herself says Google's business model is focused on generating revenue from ads, which clashes with the user's goal of finding a relevant answer to their query. As a result, Google often shows paid links instead of providing a summary of the answer.
Right. Yeah.
Now, we probably would need a whole separate show to get deeply into in that paragraph about does a particular organization's business model distance itself from the user experience, which is kind of what she implies there, that Google can't offer the ultimate user experience because they're needing to sell ads.
Which is what I'm realizing with this tool as well. I mean, this tool, we can expect it to go the same way as Google because it will require a business model in the same way. And Google didn't have advertisements in the beginning either.
No, but will it though? Is it forced to go towards ads? Because what does ads mean in this context? It means that effectively it pollutes its existence, gets polluted by that.
Yeah, it's the same as Google.
Yeah. Oh. Okay, maybe it would work, but
you can even make it so you don't notice the advertising necessarily.
I see now that actually gets into one of the you're jumping straight down into another one, which is transparency. This is so the first part. We're trying to be a little bit structured there. The first bit, she talks about ways in which explanations of why people might prefer Google and prefer the chat interface to Google. And then later on, she goes on to ways in which maybe you could improve ChatGPT to be even better. And one of those is transparency. And at the moment, ChatGPT doesn't, as far as I've seen when I'm testing it, say what its sources are. It doesn't always. Sometimes it gives you explanations of why it gives disclaimers or explains things, but it doesn't always give its full reasoning. It doesn't. I've not noted to give citations. Generally,
it gives citations, and it can even quote stuff that isn't true. It can cite papers that don't exist, so which is interesting as well.
Yes, exactly. So then, when you get into the kind of business model and advertising, if they were baking. And if they baked in impurities into the answers in the form of ads, that I noticed one. I asked it for to write some JavaScript yesterday for me.
Yeah.
And in the example code it replies with, because it does actually reply with fully functional programming code when you ask these questions, it used car brands as an example, because it was something that involved like 4 different cases in this JavaScript structure. So it used 4 car brands.
So it may even be testing advertising right now.
Maybe. I mean, I noticed there were 4 different manufacturers
so
4 different manufacturers of cars. It wasn't 4 different models of the same manufacturer.
Yeah, right.
But you can see how there'll be very, very subtle ways of getting advertising to this, which wouldn't be legal.
No, it wouldn't. Unless
in many countries, you're actually supposed to make it known. I mean, like on Instagram, you see it says a paid partnership with, because you, in certain territories, you have to disclose when you're getting paid to advertise something.
That's why influencers are getting in so much trouble, because they're so bad at disclosing.
Yeah. And the AI would the AI be subject to that, because it's an AI. It's not a person.
Ooh.
Anyhow, moving on. So going back to the ways in which it might be better than Google, you've already talked about it, the natural dialogue.
Yeah.
That it feels like you're talking to a human being. It feels like a real conversation. So that is just that more human feeling of doing this. I'm asking a question, I'm getting an answer back, and you can even then come with follow-up questions, and it maintains the conversation. It knows the context, where you were, where you've got to, what you've said previously in this conversation. So there's so much that feels quite natural.
Exactly. I mean, and that's one way of correcting things that it may interpret as. Oh, I don't have a good example. So you search for something related to baker, but it interprets as the profession, but you were interested in a person named Baker, and then you actually correct it by just replying to it. No, I meant a person. And so when it comes to Google, it would actually have to know more and make assumptions about what you were searching for.
Yeah, it doesn't normally directly connect the next search with the previous one. Whereas if you would say, "Oh well, that's a good answer, but but what about this?" And you can add something else to it. And one flip side of this, the natural dialogue side, is accuracy. This is one of Megan's room for improvement things. Is the way in which ChatGPT replies is very confident. She says almost authoritarian tone. So it can give the impression of confidence and trustworthiness.
Yeah.
That you might not question something because it just sounds so goddamn right.
Exactly.
And without the citations, the sources, the reasoning, you might not, for a moment, question it. That in itself is risky. Tying again into subliminal advertising or hidden advertising. There's a lot of ways this could go out of off track.
I mean, because we joke about. I mean, anything you believe, you can find a page on the internet that actually describes what you believe as a fact. In this case, you actually you trust the answer because it's supposed to be intelligent or supposedly intelligent. So it's sort of a confirmation from something that isn't even human.
Yeah. And the third point she lifts as why it might be better is its ability to handle various types of inputs.
That's what I really like.
Yeah, there's an inbuilt affordance here in the tool that you don't have to spell things correctly. You don't have to have great grammar. You can write stuff badly. You can miss words out. You can spell stuff badly. You spell stuff incorrectly and jumble words up, and it gets it. I haven't tried mixing languages yet, but I know it's multilingual because I tested that too, and you can write in various different languages, and it understands and replies back.
And I really like, based on what we were actually talking about before with accessibility, that this is actually beneficial to accessibility because it means that people don't need to necessarily know the language. They don't need to know grammar. And I actually tested, as we were talking, to asking the AI or ChatGPT about, can you explain what 1 in 5 means? And it has a long paragraph where it actually explains what 1 in 5 means, which means that it can actually help people make sense of content.
Oh, right, yeah. So if you haven't understood something that you've read or heard, you could actually ask it, and it will give you it's like in that sense, it is like more like an encyclopedia, a personal encyclopedia that will talk back, will describe to you an answer and try to explain it more than just a Wikipedia page or a search results page.
Yeah.
It's now I think that aspect is really, I think there is a lot of accessibility benefits to some of this, the way it can find and present answers. But we've already highlighted some of the dangerous sides of this too. But by and large, I think this is a wonderful thing, and I can really understand why people are liking it more than Google, because it does feel like I'm getting served more directly than Google. That's appealing.
It's appealing and it's very dangerous.
but
for some things, and you need to understand. So it's like now you need to learn, what can I trust, what can I not trust, when is it useful, when is it not useful. So there's a learning curve, of course, as always with new tools.
Yeah, and it can't use it for everything. I mean, Google still, blows ChatGPT out of the water when it comes to certain content discovery, so new content. When it comes to like maybe searching products, especially when localities are involved,
opening hours for
find
stores.
Me an Indian restaurant in Stockholm. I mean, maybe you can answer, I haven't tried that. I haven't tried restaurant recommendations. Maybe it is good at it. But of course, another thing that Google is going to be very good at is telling you giving you the location of a specific website or destination, Like, when you know where you want to find, it's an actual website you want to go to, and you're trying to find the website, then Google is going to hands down be a good tool for that.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you notice, Per, at the very end of the article, that she revealed that it was ChatGPT that tweaked the title?
Oh no, I didn't see that. Interesting.
Yeah, no. So the original title of the post was "Why People Prefer ChatGPT Over Google: A UX Perspective," and she asked the AI, "Help edit this into a clickbaity title."
Ooh.
And ChatGPT replied with, "How ChatGPT is blowing Google out of the water: a user experience breakdown."
Yeah. So we were baited by
baited by an AI, driven by a human. I mean, it's puppet mastery, isn't it?
Mm.
But it's. I mean, I do really like this. Is really, really interesting and very, very useful. I've already in recent times now managed to get stuff out of ChatGPT that I can actually use in my work.
I have as well, especially code is
code is the thing.
Yeah.
I really found it. It's incredibly, it's mind-blowingly good. You can actually just write a natural language sentence describing the code that you would like, and it gives you it. So the whole thing about should designers code? Maybe not. Maybe you can actually just know how to ask an AI a question about code. That's maybe the skill you need. Recommended listening. We started with the recommended listening, Per.
We did, because you had the different times we had actually spoken about Dyscalculia as well.
Yeah, Dyscalculia. But I'm gonna trust the pronunciation. Anyway, so yeah, episode 196, accessibility for designers, and then also episode 253, the state of accessibility with Derek Featherstone. They're both really quite related to the first article we talked about.
Remember to keep moving.
See you on the other side.
So, James, I once knew a mathematician who hated negative numbers.
The mathematician hated negative numbers?
Yeah. She would stop at nothing to avoid them.